Hello and welcome to the Cultural Grants Approval webinar. We also have a second webinar recording available to guide you through the reimbursement process once your project has been approved by OFCC. Your guides through the world of cultural grants are myself, Jessica DeLong, Grants Administrator, and Chris Bruner, Grants Financial Analyst. Items that we'll be discussing today are the background for these grants, the website, the initial submittal form, approval guidelines and project agreement, and timeline for approval of your projects. First up, we have the background. In June of 2022, House Bill 687 was signed by Governor DeWine for fiscal year 2023 and 2024 and will become effective September 13th, 2022. In that bill, 181 cultural projects were appropriated and will be administered through OFCC. The appropriations total over $52 million. Funding for these particular grants come from tax-exempt bonds. There are certain expenditures that we can and cannot pay for. For a list of some of those eligible expenditures, please visit our website, and I'll actually be walking you through that website here in a moment. Other background information. All projects approved by OFCC must support culture over the term of the bonds, which is 10 years past the completion date of the project. To start the review process, the project sponsor, aka the grantee, will complete the submittal form and send to the grant staff. On occasion, additional information is required to complete our review. When the grant staff is ready to approve the project, the grantee will enter into the cooperative use agreement with OFCC. These grants are subject to controlling board approval, which OFCC will submit on behalf of the project sponsor. And finally, this is a reimbursement grant. When the project is fully approved, work can begin on the project and invoices may be submitted to us for payment. OFCC will directly reimburse the project sponsor, who will then in turn pay their contractors. And next up, I will be walking you through the website. The grant program website can be found under the Services Program tab there at the top. And here you can see on the left, we've highlighted the area to locate our information. In this website, you'll find such information as program eligibility and also the funding and grant process. And so this is the main page that you'll find all the necessary documentation for the review and approval process. First up, we have the grant checklist. This is a document that is for your internal use only, so you don't need to send us this. But basically, once you have all these boxes checked, then you know you're ready to submit your project to us for review. We also have a copy of the grant checklist descriptions, the submittal form, which Chris will be walking you through here in a moment. We also have a copy of the project approval guidelines, and we have the template for the cooperative use agreement and also the non-disturbance and estoppel agreement. And that agreement will be signed with those folks who lease their space. Here is the program resources page that I mentioned earlier, where you'll find a list of the eligible capital expenditures. And lastly, we have the contact page where you can find the information to get a hold of Chris and myself if you have any questions. And next up, I'm going to hand it over to Chris to walk you through that submittal form.
Thanks, Jessica. Well, the initial submittal form has 5 main sections: identification, scope, financial, real estate, and risk management. There's a 6th section for any additional information you wish to provide. So the identification section tells us about your entity. We'll need the organization name, the EIN, the organization type, which must be either an Ohio nonprofit or a governmental entity. We'll need a general contact information, as well as information on the person who ultimately will be signing the legal agreements. Scope. So this section tells us about your proposed project. You'll tell us the location of the project and describe the scope. You'll also describe how the project supports culture. Projects assigned to the OFCC are statutorily required to support culture, and that definition is found in Ohio Revised Code section 123.28. If the facility is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, there is an additional step. You'll download the form where you see the link here, and Send that to Diana and copy Jessica. You also need to acknowledge and confirm that the conclusion of your project will result in an open and operable facility that supports culture. And then you'll also need to send us some pictures when your project is complete. So the financial section asks for the appropriation name and the amount. You acknowledge that you understand Ohio prevailing wage law applies to this project. And then it talks about full funding. The project must be fully funded, meaning the local share has been raised. The local share is equal to the project budget minus the state share. And when we say raised, that includes cash on hand, written pledges, and confirmed grants. The commission won't approve a project until the local share has been raised. And finally, there's the local match requirement, and statutorily, the match requirement is 50 cents of local contributions for every $1 of state funding. Local contributions can include non-state funds going into the project or the value of the site on which the project is being constructed if the project sponsor owns it. We move on to the real estate / construction section. And here you provide us the construction schedule. And then the project sponsor must have a long-term property interest in the facility being improved. So you'll tell us whether you own it or have a long-term leasehold interest in the facility. If it's leased, we'll need a copy of the lease, and the term has to be at least 10 years from the completion date of the proposed project. And that coincides with the term of the grant agreement. The project sponsor must provide evidence that it has property and liability insurance for at least the amount of the appropriation. And the OFCC must be named as a certificate holder. We don't necessarily need to be named as an additional insured, but we do need to be a certificate holder. And documentation for that is usually in a accord form provided by your insurance company. And there's the final section, any other information that you want to include that wasn't entered other places in the submittal form. And now we can move on to the approval guidelines and the project agreement. So the approval guidelines are found on our website. Those were approved by the commission a number of years ago. And we also have a template agreement of the cooperative use agreement, which is our grant agreement. The grant agreement is a 10-year long term that begins following the completion date of your project. The CUA describes the project scope, schedule, and budget. The project sponsor confirms and warrants that it has clean title to the property or the leasehold interest. Talks about maintaining the insurance requirements, complying with all relevant laws. And if there's a default in any of the terms of the cooperative use agreement, it talks about the termination. And if it's terminated for one of the enumerated default items, then there's a clawback provision where the project sponsor would need to pay back the unamortized amount of the grant. So during our approval process, we also look at the financial situation of the project sponsor. And typically we use IRS 990s, publicly available information. Occasionally additional information will be requested from the project sponsor prior to our recommendation for approval. Moving on to the timeline. After we receive a complete project submittal, it typically takes about 30 to 60 days for our initial review. This is where we do our front-end due diligence. During that time, we may request supplemental information, and there might be some back and forth to get clarification. Once we've done our due diligence and are recommending project approval, we'll draft the grant agreement, the cooperative use agreement, and send that to the project sponsor via DocuSign to sign. Once that's returned to us, I'll use that to initiate a request to the state controlling board to release the funds. And that can take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the controlling board schedule. Once they release the funds, we present our executive director with the recommendation to approve the project. And if she agrees with that, she'll execute the agreement and it'll be final. Then the reimbursement process can begin. For any of the new appropriations, none will be approved prior to September 13th, 2022, which is the effective date plus 90 days. That concludes our presentation today. For additional resources, please watch our Cultural Grants Reimbursement Process webinar. Thank you.